I've done a lot. Um, I do need to look at a map though, because I did 3 in a row. One was in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Another one was in Cincinnati, and the third one was in Indianapolis. And I drove to all of them, so it was quite a bit of time on the road there. Currently, and this is the job that I just got. I've been there for 3 weeks. I'm manager of database engineering at Lexia Learning. We do online reading programs with schools, and then, like many people in IT, I have a degree in music education from Western Illinois. I've been a DBA for 26 years. I've been an application developer. In my 13th year at Harper College, teaching SQL classes there. And then I've been a Microsoft certified trainer for 25 years. And when I hit that 25-year anniversary, they sent me a shirt that didn't fit. So,
Would it have fit when you started?
Maybe.
They took your shirt size when you started.
Don't get that database.
So what are we going to cover? So what session is not for, this is not for somebody who's experienced in PostgreSQL. What this is that I went through the job search, right? Over the last, and Ross knows, because last time I saw him, I was talking about getting a new job and stuff like that. And the more jobs I looked, and I looked at hundreds of jobs, and more were not SQL only, SQL Server only. They were looking for SQL Server plus something, right? And more PostgreSQL was the one thing that's popping up. I didn't see MySQL very much, rarely saw Oracle, and it could be because of the searches I was looking for, right? I was looking for SQL DBA manager type position, but PostgreSQL just kept popping up more and more and more. And so I think that, and people can kind of chime in their opinions, but I think the days of a SQL Server only DBA are kind of in the past. I think more and more DBAs need to expand their skill set. And you guys know who Brent Ozar is? So Brent Ozar is one of the leaders in the SQL community. And he posted a little video. Somebody asked him that somebody had sent him an email saying Microsoft was kind of not developing new stuff in SQL Server. And the question was, should that person be worried? And his answer was no. But what he did say is that you have to open up your possibilities, right? You really have to, I think these days, you really have to be multidimensional. You have to do the SQL, but it's very good also to know other things. The job market is tough. I've been a DBA for 25 years, and I like to think I'm pretty good at it. I've been teaching for years, and I got like 5 interviews in 3 years. It's tough. It's hard to get those interviews. It's even
You can't be a one-trick pony anymore.
you can't. And so I think it's really important. So we're going to go over an introduction to PostgreSQL. We're going to talk about a couple of tools you can use, some backup and restore. And the whole idea of this is more to take your SQL Server DBA skills and transition them to PostgreSQL, right? And then, so this is more of a launching pad type session. It's simply to expose you to some of the technology in PostgreSQL. And you're going to see a lot of things similar. There's going to be some things obviously different. It's a different product. So you're going to see some things that are different. But you are going to see a lot of similarities between them. We're going to talk about process management. How many people have killed a SPID because it was blocking or something like that in SQL? It happens.
Oh, sure.
You know, and so we're going to talk a little bit about that. Execution plans from a DBA perspective are absolutely essential, right? So we're going to talk a little bit about that. A real introduction to indexing. Indexing is one of those things you could literally talk for hours on. You know, I could probably talk 2 days just on SQL Server indexing. And then introduction to the security. It's similar yet very different than SQL Server. And then talk about what's called the vacuum process within Postgre. That's something SQL doesn't have. So what is PostgreSQL? It's open source. The price is right. And I think, and I might be wrong, I think that's one of the reasons why more and more companies are starting to use it. is because the fact that it is not something that costs them money. And we just started a project at work because we had a DBA and the DBA put the wrong edition, put Enterprise Edition on 3 of our servers, and we're up for renewal. So we got to downgrade those to standard because we don't want to pay. They're 24 cores each. You know, you're business owner, right? Or
No.
manager.
Consultant, yeah.
It's all. Can you imagine a company comes to you and they need to pay for that many cores of Enterprise?
Yes.
Or you recommend that many cores?
Times 3.
Yeah, they're gonna be like, I don't think so.
It's easy to upgrade, not so easy to downgrade.
Yeah, so we, you know, we have that out there, but it's the price is expensive. When I was at a company, our SQL budget was over $2 million a year. Just the SQL Server budget for licensing. And so it's something that is very costly. It's a great product, but it does cost money. And as the economy does what it's doing, companies are looking to really kind of minimize that and make use of their dollars, right?
Absolutely.
Postgres is one of the things I think companies are looking at that. I think that's why you're starting to see this in ads more, because either they have it or they're looking to have it, and they want somebody that can move with them into a different product. But I also found that a lot of the companies, they're not exclusive Postgres. They still have a bunch of SQL servers around, but they are using Postgres as well. It is a relational database management system. And this is a statement I got from the Postgres website. PostgreSQL Global Development Group remains committed to making PostgreSQL available as a free and open source software in perpetuity, whatever that is. I should have read that first. But they're not looking to move to a point where it's going to start costing. And I think that's an important thing as well. The current version is 17. However, I got an email this afternoon that said 18 is in beta right now. So it will be coming out. And it uses for extensions for additional functionality. When I first read that, the first thing I thought of was something Microsoft retired, Azure Data Studio. A lot of functionality in that tool, which is a great tool, is in the extensions. And what I liked about it is that if you wanted to do something and it doesn't do it, write the extension, right? And same thing, type it here. So how popular is Postgres? So these are 2 screenshots that I did a search on it, and these 2 things. I don't know what those numbers represent. I do know that if you look at the one on the left, you see the increase of Postgres. It's 22% from March to April. So companies are starting to use it more and more. And then the chart up there on the right, you see Postgres is also number 4 there as well. Will it ever pass SQL Server? Does it?
Huh?
Oh,
Any idea why we're seeing such a blow up in Postgres? Vector store,
oh,
vector store for AI. Every single one of my customers is using Postgres for their vector store for RAG implementations, which also means why not use it for the regular structured stuff that goes along with it?
because you got it.
And then cost.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, cost, that's
But Postgres was the
That's gonna be
first
my,
house.
my guess.
Data type.
So it's up and coming.
But here's the thing, though. Okay, it's free. But, yeah, that's a big thing, but you want to support your enterprise on open source?
Well, you know, I think the answer to that question, it depends, right? Depends on your company and a lot of other things. But I look at where I was before I'm at now. We had 160 servers. Two or 3 of them were really the tier 1s that really drove the business, right? But we had all these other servers that could have worked out very well with Postgres, right? We had one server that was responsible for $1.5 billion in revenue. Would I put that in Postgres? No. But we had all these other systems that I think would work really well with something like this. And we wouldn't have had that multi-million-dollar budget for SQL Server.
I'll ask you one more question.
Yeah.
Because I'm sure you want to keep moving on your slides as well. Would you put it in something like Postgres Flex server in Azure, which is essentially an enterprise version of an open source software.
I would have no problem putting anything into Azure right now. There is there's the Azure SQL database. There is a Postgres version of that as well, which means it's just the database in the cloud. I haven't really looked into it, but the Azure SQL database, I would have no problem going to a company and saying, hey, this database is a classic candidate and a good candidate for Azure SQL. I would have no problem doing that.
Postgres Flex Server. Well, I'll do my little plug. Postgres Flex Server is in fact our implementation of open source Postgres. All the extensions that we would allow on it
Right.
are going to be vetted through Microsoft.
Yeah.
Because of course, one of the problems that you could run into with something like Postgres in its native implementation is you're like, oh, that's a cool extension. Let's go do that. And it's got malicious code in it because it's open source.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah, and you always, and I've told my students and I've told my DBA teams for years, it's okay to get code and stuff from online, but you got to vet it, you got to test it, you got to do all these things because ultimately, we as DBAs are still responsible if that code gets into production and does something bad.
Yep.
The CIO, CEO, they don't want to hear, oh, I downloaded it from the internet, not my fault. Yeah, it still is because it's your responsibility to properly vet that code. And Jared, I think that's what you're kind of getting at is Microsoft helps with that. But ultimately, it's still our responsibility to make sure that code isn't malicious, to make sure it does what it's supposed to do in these types of things. And so I think that this kind of shows, and then added what Jared was talking about, I think Postgres is going to do nothing more than get more and more popular. And like I said before, I looked at hundreds of job postings for SQL Server, and more were saying Postgres. Fewer and fewer were saying MySQL. They just weren't headed, it just didn't look like things were headed in that direction. And so that's kind of where the session came from was I was starting to see that little fundamental shift. Now, one of the things is there's no management studio inside Postgres. However, there are a couple of different tools that you can use. You still have the command line, which we'll see in a little bit. You have what's called PSQL, which will work as well, so you can use that. But there's also two other tools. One is called pgadmin. Remember, there's a lot of extensions and a lot of different software components in Postgres that are third party. This one is not. It is put out by the Postgres folks. That is the admin tool. But then there's another one, and I had never heard of this until about 8 months ago, called dbeaver. Anybody ever heard of that? It's a very good tool.
I've been working on that.
So you look, it's got Postgres, it's got SQL Server, it's got all these different products, MySQL, Oracle. So you can use one tool for all your products. I really like that. And so I don't use it. I did use it when I just started a new job. I've only been there for 3 weeks, but I can't install it without it vetting through. I had a code that I wrote. I have out on my set of about 180 SSRs reports that you run in Management Studio. It allows you to be able to get information and monitoring all that stuff. I wrote it, but I had to vet it through all of our infrastructure and all those folks before I could run it at the company I'm at now, even though I wrote it. But they still had to do that. All right. So there's a couple of tools out there that you can use. So one is and I do really like this one for it's about as fast as Management Studio.
Yeah.
And so I really like it. And then we got a little thing that's upgrade, and I want to do that. So I can come in here and a lot of similar types of things. So I can go to the accounting database, and I can go to schemas, and I can go to the public, and I can go to tables, and there's one table, and I can right click, view table. So that's the definition, or I can right click and I can go view data. So this is a really good tool. The more I use it, the more I actually like it, right? I haven't used it much in the SQL Server side of things. Has anybody used this on SQL Server side? But again, I really do like it. So, and it's a free download. So you can do a lot of the same management stuff through here. Then the other one is, are you sure? Yes. So this is it's called PG Admin. It's currently at version 4. It's kind of like SQL Server and the database engine are separate products now. This is no different. It's a separate download, separate install, all of that. Management Studio used to come with SQL. When they stopped doing that, 2008?
I can't remember.
Like that.
Like 14 or 16.
So, but they're separate downloads and this is as well, but I can do, and this is where we're gonna do most of our demos, but it's asking for my password. So, and we can see a lot of the similar types of things, but there's a lot of different things as well. It is a different product. So you're gonna see some things that are different, but you're gonna see some same things that are different places, right? So schemas has been SQL Server, and so we're all used to that. Of course, that's where your tables are. So public schema, that's the default. So SQL Server has the DBO schema. This is the one that comes with it. And then you look at tables, and then you have columns, you have constraints, indexes. So a lot of the same terminology, a lot of the same thing. Remember, it's a relational database engine, just like SQL, Oracle. So you're going to see a lot of the similar terminologies, but you are going to see some differences that we're going to talk about here in a little bit. So again, it's a very nice tool. We're going to talk over here. So I have the default workspace where I can see the tree. If I want to write code, I can click here and it'll ask me to connect to a server, and then it'll ask for my password. Hopefully then I got to put the password in again. And the enter button doesn't work, so I got to click there. And so now I can write my code. So another thing right down here is the pSQL tool. Now there's 2 different ones. You can use the command line as well, but you can use it here too. So when I click here, it again going to ask me for the server name. So I click up here, and it's going to ask me for my password. Again, I keep hitting enter. So, and this is the pSQL that you can use.
So it's basically a different window connection
Yeah,
for command line.
yeah,
Okay.
yep.
Okay.
So it's so you have these different options there, but there's also command line. When you're in command line, if I go here and type in, there's SQL shell, SQL. So I can click this as well, and it's going to ask me what server, and then it's going to ask me what database I want to connect to, what port. And the default port is in SQL, it's 1433. Here it's 5432. So it's so then username, then it's going to ask for my password. And now I'm in SQL and I can do whatever it is I want to do with this, right? So it's a nice tool. We're not going to spend a lot of time in here, but it's good to know that you have multiple places that you can do what you need to accomplish, right? And so coming back to here, again, I really like the tool on the right. The more I use it, the more I like it. I think whoever came up with that, whoever works with it, is did a really nice job with it. So here's the PSQL. It's a command line tool. You can you can do a lot more. You can run many PostgreSQL commands with it, but you can list your databases. You can change your database by putting /. C, then database name, it'll switch the context, kind of like in Management Studio where you click the database in the upper left-hand corner. You can change the context of your database while you're in the pSQL tool. You can gather information about your tables. You can list out all your tables. So there's a lot of commands. This is just a few of them. But again, it's a really nice tool to use, especially if you like using command line. Some people love doing that kind of stuff. Me, I was a GUI person from the beginning, and so I tend to gravitate more towards those types of things. But some people just like to type away and write the code, which is fine. To me, if it works for you, use whatever works for you.
I like GUIs. Yeah, the reason I like them is because I have multiple platforms to support.
Yeah.
So anything that's gonna make my life easier, I'm all for it.
Yeah, and another thing that I like about that the PG admin tool has, it has this nice little dashboard to it. So when
Oh, yeah, that is nice.
when I come here, and I think they have some of this in Management Studio, but I'm not sure. So if I come back over here, close that out. So I'm going to connect to my server. Actually, let me do it open. Oh, got to connect to my server first. Oh, went right back where didn't want to go. Come back over here. Now you click here, open dashboard. Right. So, and you look, there's some things I can get. This is database session. So just like in Management Studio, each tab is a separate connection. But in Management Studio, it gives you the SPID number. Unfortunately, here it does not. So we're going to talk about SPIDs in a little bit. But keep in mind, every window you open is a separate connection, just like SQL Server. But here it says tuples in. Tuples is a row.
Yeah.
It's pretty much what it is. Blocking, so there's some good information here. But you can go into state, information and sessions, locks, configuration. This is like if you right click on the server, Management Studio, go to properties. This is kind of like what this is. And just like there's a lot of properties in here as well. So I really like this dashboard, especially if you're having problems. It kind of jumps out and you might be able to tell right here, because we had a server that it was we did medical waste disposal, and our drivers had little handheld devices. And that server worked great when there's less than 700 SPIDs. Once it got a little bit above 700 SPIDs, we started to see problems. And so I created an alert. And so it went above 700 SPIDs. I went over to the help desk and said, "Hey, you guys getting any calls?" "No, we're not." Said, "You're going to in about 45 minutes. Sure enough, 45 minutes later, their phones exploded. In that case, what we did is we had an index that was reading a XML column without an index, and it was a massive table. So it was causing all kinds of grief for us. So, I mean, something as simple as the number of SPIDs can be an indicator of a problem, that you want to look into. So again, this is a very nice tool. I like the fact that it's built into it. SQL Server Management Studio has some of the same types of things. You go into those reports. There's some there. And if you go to my blog, you'll see I wrote a report you can run in SS Management Studio. And it runs 22 queries, and it has all kinds of things. And I've been using it for a number of years. It's available on my blog, but I've been able to tell real easily where the problem might be. Anybody a development manager or application developer? So that was the shut the application developer up report. And here's why. He always asks the same questions. Any blocking, jobs running, same types of questions. What's the CPU like? What's memory look like? So this report, when it pops up, it tells you all that information right off the front, which I really like. And so that's a little bit about the dashboard. So installing it, like SQL Server, and I don't remember what version it started with. You can install it on Linux, but that was
2016.
2016. You can install this on different OSs as well. And this is a nice little chart that there's the link where I got it from. Of course, it's not going to support 32-bit versions, but there's Windows, Mac OS, Linux as well. So you can get this. And again, the current version of Postgres, according to the website, is under support until 2029, right? And like with many other Postgres or open source things, as a community member, somebody who uses it, you have an opportunity to contribute to that as well, which I really like, because you can help drive what the product is doing. Some terminology, and a lot of this terminology will be the same. Schemas, tables, data types, a lot of that stuff's going to be the same, but there can be a few different things. Like, for example, PostgreSQL clustered, right? When I hear cluster, I think always on cluster, Windows cluster, I hear that. That's not what this is. This is the equivalent of a SQL Server instance, right? So you have SQL Server and you can install multiple instances on the same server, but you still have an instance. That's where you put your databases, that's where you put your jobs and that type of stuff. Well, a cluster is that, right? It's the same thing. Collection of databases is managed by a single instance of running database server. SQL versus pSQL. So SQL is the language you use to write, to extract data and that kind of stuff. pSQL, as you saw, is the tool that you use. Login versus a group. In SQL Server, they're completely different paths to create, right? Here, you follow the same path, and what makes it a group versus a login? You give it a password. If you give it a password, it is a login. No password, it turns into a group, right? And we'll show that when we get to the end. So similar types of things, you can still assign security at various levels within the SQL Server architecture. Same thing here, but in SQL Server, I right-click, add group, right-click, new user, right? A little bit different here. A tuple is that of a row, right? And we'll talk more about why I don't know why they call it differently, but it is. But you can actually have multiple versions of the same row. And what they're doing with that, and we'll talk more about it, is it helps reduce locking. And with reduced locking, you're reducing the likelihood of blocking, right? And so then you have globals. Globals are the things that are not database specific, like logins and groups, right? They're not specific to a database. They're at the global level, right? So you will hear that when you get into backups. If you dig deeper, you're going to hear, well, this will back up the globals. Well, that's what they're talking about. They're talking about the things that are at the server level and not at the database level, right? When you do install SQL Server, or I'm sorry, I've taught a few SQL Server classes over the years. When you install Postgres, it will, just like SQL Server, will install a service. What it won't do is install an agent for the jobs. That is a separate download, right? Remember the extensions I was talking about? That is an extension. We're really not going to get into that, and we're not going to get into jobs, but that is a separate extension. You got to go and download, you got to install. So if you do want jobs, that's one of the options you have to be able to create jobs. But as you see, that also puts in a separate service as well. So there's fewer services. Because when I install SQL Server, I can do SSIS, SSRS, SSAS, the database engine, and then they got these, what are these, community experience things?
Oh, you can't turn that off.
Yeah,
Although SSIS, SSRS.
they're separate
are
installs.
separate.
Yeah. So you will create these services as well as you install things. Multi-version concurrency control. We're not going to dig deep into this, but this is what it does when it allows you to have multiple versions of the same row. And again, if I have one row I'm working on, it's going to create a separate version of that row. And then when you go to read it, you're not going to read what I'm version. You're going to go over here and you're going to get the row here. So now there's two versions of it, right? So that's important because it can prevent blocking. So, and it only applies to writers. So when I go to make a change, it will use a snapshot for it. But it does also create what are called dead tuples. Literally, that's what it's called, dead tuples. And what are those? Those are rows that have been modified. And we're going to talk a little bit about that because that is one of the administrative tasks you have to do. Just like in SQL Server, there's a lot of administrative things that we need to do. We need to manage our indexes. We need to manage our users. We need to do all these types of things. Databases that are no longer in use, we want to clean those up. Well, dead tuple, what it can do is it can increase the size of your database. There's a process that you can run that will delete them, right?
Is it the unmodified line or the newest line modified?
It's no longer relevant, so it'll go through, you modify it, and then I think it's the row that, the way it used to be, right?
So, yeah, so here's what happened. Anybody familiar with RCSI or read committed snapshot isolation in SQL Server?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's ultimately the same thing, right? So row is a row is a row. You come in and you need to do an update. And at the same time, I want to read. I'm not going to read what you're updating. Can't do that. That's not allowed. You haven't committed it yet.
Right.
So I will read the version, right? The most recent version before you started updating it. Once you commit it, the one that I read becomes dead.
Yeah.
Right? And so instead of actually grabbing and locking a row to change it, which is what we do in SQL Server, unless RCSI is enabled, you'll be working with another row, right? So of course, the idea there is we are assuming that the data that you're reading is not going to change, and it's okay for you to read it as it currently is, which I have always been okay with too, because it's not real until it's committed. I want to see what it looks like right now. I'm okay with reading what some people call old data. I'm like, it's not old because it hasn't changed yet.
Right.
So,
Exactly.
but there are ramifications for that when you're working in certain financial applications or banking applications where, where like running totals might become important, or in the case where, let's say, you are trying to buy tickets for seat A1, right? If 20 people see it as available and everybody start trying to buy it, you've got a problem. So, you have to manage that either at the application level, or you can screw up your database and let it manage it.
Yeah, so that's what creates these dead tuples. At the end, we'll talk about the vacuuming process that will go through and eliminate those. So let's move into another core administrative task that DBAs have, and that is backups. So there's a couple different types of backups that are out there. And one of the things as I was putting this together is it's far more complex than SQL Server from a backup perspective. Is you have a bunch of different options. And then as we move along, there's a slide that has a third-party tool that somebody had written that will actually, what I think, does a great job of making it easier to manage your backups, right? Because if you have your backups, they're important, but if you spend 5 hours trying to add a database to a backup, that's not very efficient, right? We want administrative tasks like that. We want to be able to do that quickly, right? So there's a couple of commands you can use, and these are actually separate EXEs that will get installed. They're not applications, but the EXEs are sitting on your drive called pgdump. That's one of them. You can use this to back up a single database. The key thing, if you look at the first one there, it doesn't block readers. Snapshot as of the time it starts of the database can back up a single table. I like that. And I wish hopefully SQL Server one day will give us the ability to back up and restore a single table. How's that?
I doubt it.
I doubt it. And I haven't done it yet. I kind of tend to agree with that. You can also compress the backup. It's not inherent native. There's a switch you have to use that force it to be compressed. And you can split the multiple files. I've been doing that with SQL Server for a long time for big databases. You can send it to multiple files and speed up the backup. I took a 20-hour backup, got it down to 4 hours by sending it to, instead of one file, sending it to 5 files. Yeah.
Are you gonna talk about recovery?
Just a little bit.
All right, I'll wait till you talk about recovery.
Okay.
Get into that.
And then there's another one called PG dump all. And what this does, this will dump all the databases, right? And then, but you can exclude a single database as well, or multiple databases. So there might be some databases out there that you don't want to get backed up on a regular basis. And you can use dump or dump all to do that. Then for
Is this snapshot similar to one of the providers they provide? Is the snapshot thing similar to the cloud providers they provide. Like if we take one of the snapshot of the machine, it just prevents the state where it is.
Yeah,
We can just roll back where.
yeah, so it's the state it was in when it starts,
Mhm.
not when it finishes, when it starts. So it does a
Okay.
snapshot and then,
But it's not, as I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's not a snapshot technology where it's like
right,
instant backup.
right.
In fact,
No.
I think this is kind of long.
It could take a long time,
Mhm.
especially if you got
Does
big
take a long time.
databases.
Yeah.
And so, that's the logical backups you have to, but physical backups are also important. If you need point in time restore, this is what you need. Right? And I'm not aware of too many databases out there that don't need point in time database, restores, right? I've had people over the years, I go, well, do you want transaction log backups? And they say, nah, don't worry about it. And my response is always, so it's okay to lose a day's worth of data. Oh, no, 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 no. We got to have that, right? So the point in time is critical and has been and always will be a critical element of being a DBA. And so this is where you kind of want to go for this. And then there's two types, online and offline. But if you look, it says must be shut down or in backup mode, depending on how you choose it, right? So the uses an OS copy command. Again, the server must be shut down, but who can shut down a server? The idea of shutting down a server every night for backups is not something that appeals to me very much. I get the feeling I would get called a lot if that would happen. So I'm going to gravitate more towards the online. It's called continuous archiving, which is something that must be enabled, and we'll talk a little bit about that. It does have transaction logs. They don't call them transaction logs, but in essence, that's what it is. But it's a little bit different than SQL Server. SQL Server, it's a file and it keeps writing, then you back it up, it clears it out, kind of thing. The way this works is it creates a file. When it gets to 16 megs, it creates another file. It's a 16 megs, it creates another file. And those are the files you need to archive, right? So if you want to have the ability to restore point in time, it's this base PG underscore base backup that you need to use. And so this is like the command line that you'll see. So if I come over here, and you can do it here. So if I go to a database, I can back it up here as well, but that's manual. No different than in SQL Server. You can do that as well. But I'm going to come in here and I'm going to open a file. I want this one. So I am going to grab this file. For this thing right here. So if you look, it's going to the local host. That's the H. P is the port. U, you notice it's capitalized because those switches are key sensitive. There are some that are lowercase is one thing, uppercase is something else. Then the U is the user account. And the D is directory. So in this case, it's a physical backup. So it's going to do an entire backup of your entire Postgres infrastructure, right? Not of the server, just your Postgres part, right? So I'm going to copy this. And then I come here. I just simply come to C command line. So I got to do CD, C, / program files. If I can type Postgres QL. CD, I think it's 17, because it's that version 17. And so I'm assuming that when we go to 18, it'll be 18. Just like in SQL Server, it's 140, 150, 160 kind of thing. And then we want to bin. I can type. And there it is right there. So if I go here, paste that. If I go to that location, I can see all these EXEs there. Right? So I put this in there and it's going to create a folder in the PG DB underscore backup, and the folder is going to be called my backup, right? And when we go in there, you're going to see all these folders because it's taking a snapshot of your infrastructure for Postgres. So when I hit it, I'm going to ask for my password, and it's going to go, I put it in, and now it's actually backing it up.
Hmm.
However, there is a switch, and I thought I put it in here, but I must have taken it out. I think it's a capital P where it will tell you the progress here, right? So it'll tell you based off of size. It'll say it's this size and that's where you're at, so you can actually see it. But if we go to that folder, go to the C drive. Go to the backup. There it is right there. So in this case, it's 8 gig, it's gonna back up. Right?
Okay, so this is backing up, this is you using that PG based backup,
Yeah,
and it's backing up the database like it looks right now.
everything. Backing
Everything.
up all the databases, everything related to the entire Postgres infrastructure on the server, it's backing it all up.
But now, 20 minutes from now, they've done a ton of updates,
Right,
and I want to do a recovery.
right.
I've got this.
Yeah, this is your point you would go back to, but those files that are the transaction type of, that's what the files you're gonna need to get to the point in time.
Right.
But you have, and we'll talk a little bit about this, you have to archive those, because if you don't, they'll start overwriting each other,
Yep.
right? So the old ones go away, then it keeps the, put a new one there, right? So there is a process you can write that'll archive those off. And it's a config file that you can change. So if we come back over here, it's done now. And so we come back in here, we open this up, and there, that's what it backed up,
Mhm.
right? So now I can use this, and it's the entire infrastructure, right? So all the databases, everything. So now I can use this to do the restores. I can do the point in time restores off of this, right? So that's a little bit about the backups. So we're gonna talk a little bit more about this. We come here, the restore, there's a couple different ways you can do this. You can do this right through both those tools, those graphical tools, you can do it through there, or you can use a command line. If you notice, pg_restore.exe is the one that you want to be able to use. And then there's switches that you'll look at: port, progress, clean, create. So clean means it'll drop it, and then create means it'll create a new database, right? So it's not like SQL Server. You can't really overwrite an existing database. You actually got to delete it and then recreate it. So it's a little bit different. I'm not, just the idea of deleting a database for any reason makes me a little nervous. And so that will take me a while to get used to, something like that. Because I haven't done this, but I know people who have accidentally deleted the wrong database.
So you can't just restore to the side, like
You can
if you do
restore.
create and then do it as its own.
Yeah, so you can delete the database. You can't you'll rename, so if you rename the old one,
Yep.
you can't give this another name that I know of.
Oh, because when you're restoring it,
It's
it
got the
restores
name
with the
already.
same name.
Right.
It restores the same name.
Not like in SQL, you do a restore, you can give it a different
Right.
name.
It's the same thing for schema or table level backups too.
Right.
You're restoring them to the same name.
So, if I was restoring a database, even in SQL Server, I would not delete. I would rename first, then restore, because something can always go wrong, right? And then once it's successfully restored and the applications are working, then I'll go back and I'll delete the database, right? Same thing I would do here. But you do have to, at some point, drop the database. And this time where it says drop database accounting with force, that's kind of where it doesn't matter if there's connections to it, boom, it just will delete it. Just like in SQL Server, you can't delete a database if there's connections to it, right? So,
Yeah, I always wanted to see them do a redirected restore type thing.
Yeah.
Where I could take it and as I restored as a different name.
yeah. So, well, fortunately, it's open source.
Start writing.
Is that right, Ross?
What I'm asking to be done is very difficult.
Yep.
Because when if you take a look at the backup, it, in the backup is all the DDL used to create the database, create the whole infrastructure, schemas, All works.
This is a third-party tool that I was talking about, called PG Backrest. What you'll find is most of the tools that are outside of Postgres, most of the extensions usually start with PG. And this one, from what I've seen, and I've not used it, but from what I've seen, what I read, it has a lot of good feedback on it. And the thing that when I was looking at this that I really like is that full differential are supported. It's not susceptible to the time resolution issues of our sync, making differential and time incremental backups safe without requirements while that goes on. Makes it easier for me to do those types of things. Something we could easily do in SQL Server. A lot more difficult here.
Yeah.
But this makes it a lot easier to do it. So there's the link and all the sites, I'll send to Ross, but they'll also be available on my blog. Not tonight, probably sometime tomorrow, maybe.
Mhm.
I'll put it up there. But again, this is a nice tool. You might want to take a look at using. This is the log files I was talking about. While archiving, while is write-ahead logging, SQL Server does that. So you need these for point in time. So there is a file called postgres.conf that you need to actually go and modify, and that's kind of what it looks at. So archive mode on, and the archive command, that's where you'll put where it goes. So you need to archive them, but they will get overwritten. You notice they're all 16 megs in size. So as it gets to 16 megs, it'll create new ones. So, but take a look at those names. It kind of reminded me when I first saw this, it reminded me of the file names for extended event files.
Oh, yeah.
SQL Server. But that I read up, I found out where they got the name from. It's some obscure date, and it was the number of seconds since that date or something like that. I can't remember what it was, but these actually have a use, right? So the first one is a timeline. So whenever you have a recovery, the timeline will increment. The second one is the log file ID. The third is the segment ID. These are all in hexadecimal. You can use this to figure out the order of which these files will work, right? So if you notice the files are A, B, C, D, E, F, G, right? So this will help you identify the sequence of these files.
It better not be a G in hex.
No,
Nope.
in fact, technically it's Abel, Baker, Charlie, Doggies, Fox.
It's what?
Abel, Baker, Charlie, Dog, Easy, Fox.
There is,
Systems programmer.
so there is the code. So if you're ever curious about which WAL file is the current file, that command right there will tell you which one is the current file, right? And if you want more information, there's a nice link that I use to get information on this. Now, moving on from backups, execution plans is another one of those things. It's critical for us to be able to do, because just like in SQL Server, when we write a query, we tell SQL Server what we want. We don't tell SQL Server how to get it, right? The execution plan is how did we get it, right? How did, in this case, Postgres, what did it do? Did it use an index? Did it not use an index? There's some terminology things, but you notice there's some common things. Nested loops. You ever see nested loops in execution plans? So you'll see a lot of similarities in the terminology in the execution plans. So just like in SQL Server, it uses statistics to get this, right? There is an actual and estimated plan. If you run with explain and no analyze, it doesn't actually execute the query. That's the estimated execution plan, right? If you use explain, analyze, it actually runs the queries, and then we'll create the plan on what it actually did, right? And so it's not any different than in SQL Server. If you run the estimated and actual close enough, it's going to be the same plan, right? Unless something happens where your statistics change significantly, you're probably going to get the same plan, right? So a lot of times what I will do if I get asked to run a query, I will look at the estimated first, just to kind of see, am I going to have a problem running this query? And there's been a couple times I was like, hey, yeah, I can't run that now. I got to wait till after hours to run that. And then, of course, I get the normal, well, we gotta have it now. I'm like, okay.
Hmm.
Can I crash the system? Nope. Okay, so then I'll get it for you tonight, right? So a similar type of thing. So, and you look on the left there, that is was it a show plan where it's the text
Yeah.
in SQL? It has a similar type of thing and it'll return that. Now, where do you get the graphical plan? There's a couple different places you can go. There is this thing called PG Mustard, which is not a free tool. So when you're looking at the tools related to Postgres, you have to be careful. Some are free, some are not, right? So some people are looking to make money. If they can, great. I just wish I could write something where I can make some money while I'm sleeping. That would be kind of good. And then there's this other one called explain.depezsd. I don't even know how to say that. What this is a website where you can take that text and you can paste it in there and it'll spit out what you see on the right. Here's the problem with that. Execution plans sometimes can include PII and PHI data. And here's what I don't know. If I did that, because there is another, there's some SQL related type things that do this too. If an auditor came to my desk and said, hey, you pasted that execution plan on somebody else's website, do you know if they saved it or not? I don't know. I can't guarantee that, right? So you have to be very careful using third-party tools that require you to be able to paste into their website, right? So it's something that use with caution, because you know PII, PHI. Oh, did I scare you away?
Oh, no, sorry to interrupt. Really enjoying it, but I've got to get him to the train station, so.
Okay, well, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
I'll probably be listening to you next week. So again, you just have to proceed with caution, right? You do not want to be known as that DBA that released PII and PHI data to a third party. That is not very conducive to your career, right? So be real careful doing that. So if I come here and then back over here, and then here I can say when I go to open in a new tab. So when I go to open this, this is plan 3. So I need to switch to the IMDb database. You know, in SQL Server, you can click the little drop-down box, simply switch or use the used keyword. Here, all I have to do is go to new connection, change the database, and hit save, and now I run it. So you notice I got explain and analyze here. If I run this, there it is right there. So now I can copy and paste this, and I can now go and figure out, you know, what's the graphical plan. I personally like the graphical plan. I have a session explicitly on execution plans, and I really point out how easily you can see potential bottlenecks. Like if you get a line that's about this thick, right? The most I've ever seen in an execution plan is when it tried to read 7.5 million rows and couldn't figure out why the job kept not doing what it's supposed to do, because it was supposed to read the 7.5, then delete like 2 million of them every 2 minutes. And it was timing out. I'm like, well, there you go. That's why. And how did I find that? Extended events. And so, you know, execution plans are critical. You really need to be able to utilize them, be able to easily identify where potential bottlenecks are in your query. Because remember, this is how, in this case, Postgres actually got the data. You simply said, this is what I want, right? And so again, that's a very, very important thing. And so it's the explain and analyze that you can put in there. Now, processes are also very important. Now we can use SP-Who2 and SQL Server, and there's a lot of different ways you can get that information. But in this case, it's PG_stat_activity, and you'll get a screen similar to like what you see below, right? And it's the same type of information, except for when I go to run this. Here. So now I got to switch to the DB database. I'm already there. Just one developer side of things. See where it says limit 300? That's the top 300, like in T-SQL.
Okay.
So it's a little bit different, but other than that, it's the same syntax because it's ANSI compliant, just like SQL Server is. So there's a lot of similarities in the SQL that you will see, but you'll see little things like that. I think you ever use KQL?
Yes,
I think that uses a limit
yeah.
as well. And so, you
And
know,
I think you can use limit in SQL, so it's just not,
well, I'm going to try it
I
tomorrow.
don't,
And so when I run this, this right here, and I'm going to leave this. What this does is it halts the execution. So it sleeps it, but it keeps the active process running, right? So I'm going to run this.
It pauses the select statement.
Yeah, well, it pauses the execution. And the reason I need it is because I need to be able to run this
That's all that.
in another query. I come back over here, run this. So now I run this. Here's my cursor. There it is. Run this. So here's my processes, right? And you guys know the SPIDs in SQL Server. That's actually the third column, not the first column. It's the third column we need if we want to terminate a SPID or a process. So we come back over here, and this is the part I really like. It's really easy for me to see the query that was running, right? And this, and SQL, I need to use DBC input buffer to be able to get it, right? So it makes it really easy to be able to get this information. So but now if I need to terminate it, so I'm going to cancel this. So I need to terminate it. I think it was this SPID here. Which one was it?
We'll find out.
That's this one here, SPID number 5.
crash.
So it's right here. So that's the SPID number. So I can right click and I can copy it. And then it's terminate backend is what you want. So if I double click and I'm going to paste it there, now I'm going to terminate that process. And now it's gone. I come back over here and it says the application has lost the database connection.
Kill is so much easier.
Yeah, but you know, I had a student told me a user called him and said, "Hey, I'm having a problem here." And he goes, "Yeah, I found the problem. I'm going to kill your process." The person stopped listening after the word "kill." He got sent to HR.
Oh, man.
Whoa.
And so what I was telling my teams that, yeah, just use terminate. That might be. I just don't need to deal with that headache. I thought that was quite a bit of an overreaction, but I think maybe there was probably some type of event that was, recent before that happened. And so if you need to terminate a process, you got to find the process using this command, but then you use terminate backend to actually kill it, right? Then the next thing we kind of want to go over is blocking. Blocking's always fun, right? We had a call once and it brought down our biggest system. And I found the user that was blocking. So the incident manager called that person into the call. I'm not doing anything. It says your name's right here. Well, I was just doing this. So I killed that process. Then another person was blocking.
You mean
We
you
called-
terminated that?
Oh, yes, I terminated. So then we called that person into the call. And so every player that was blocking, we just kept calling them into the call. And actually it was very effective because they didn't want to be kind of called out in front of everybody. But guess what they're going to do? They're going to think, oh man, got to be careful because if I'm causing a problem, they're gonna call me out in front of everybody. You know, it just a little bit of marketing of be careful what you're doing kind of thing, right? So blocking inevitably will still occur, right? You have the multiple of the rows that'll eliminate a lot of it, but it still can happen, right? So there are a lot of different blocking types inside Postgres. But what we want to do is, so this is demo 5. So I come back over here. So now I want to come back. Yes, demo 5. So then I want to also open this. Yes, demo 5.2. Just like in SQL Server, you have two processes that are trying to do the same thing, right? You notice this is trying to insert a row. This time I'm going to change it to 13. And then I'm going to change this to 13. And the reason I'm changing it to 13, because I think I might put 11 in there last night when I was testing everything. If those two numbers, because we got two processes trying to modify the same row or enter in the same row, right? If I put a different number in there, it won't block. Right? Because of the multi-version thing that we were talking about, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start this. So I have to be in the IMDb database. Come here, click save. Then I'm going to come here. I'm also got to be in the IMDb database.
Is this what you mean by the same tuple?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So, oops. IMDb, Postgres, this is one I need to change it to. It's the wrong one. So now I'm going to do this. I'm going to start. So the begin in SQL is just the start of a begin of a block, right? It doesn't start a transaction. Here it starts a transaction. So if you're used to using begin and end, which I am very used to, I put it in all my stored procedures. I'm used to that. So it's a fundamental shift in kind of how you think. So I'm going to click that. Then I'm going to try to click that. And that's going to sit there for a while.
So begin is essentially open tran,
Yes.
not open tran, begin trans,
Yeah, begin training.
begin transaction,
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
opposed to begin
Just a block
a
of code.
batch.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's a little bit different. So it's kind of sitting out there. So now what I can do is I can use this to find the blocking. So I'm going to run this. There's my blocking. So it tells me the blocking SPID. So now I can use the terminate backend to kill that process. So I think that's over here. So I grab this. And again, what I like is that query. Well, actually, this wasn't totally accurate because that is not the blocking query. It's just the query I ran in that window, right? So, but this guy's still sitting here. So if I come back over here, paste.
And what's interesting to me is that it's not execute, it's select.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, that threw me as well.
yeah. And a little
Yeah,
bit.
it still does.
Yeah, so I still have open transactions sitting out there, and this was something that is the same rollback. So I do that. Rollback. So now both transactions are done. So you can find blocking. Again, that's an essential thing for a DBA to be able to find. It's gonna happen. It's, I think, probably a little less likely here, but you're still gonna see it from time to time, right? So next thing, index optimization. The indexes are Same but different. And what I mean by that is that in SQL Server, you have clustered and non-clustered indexes.
Yep.
Right? Here you have, I think there's like 5 or 6 different types of indexes that you can run. The B tree structure works exactly the same as it does in SQL Server. So there's AK pages in SQL Server, there's AK pages here. So they work very similar, but you have different types that you can run and different types of indexes, but they're going to be for different types of queries, right? So B tree indexes, first of all, it's the default index type. It sorts in ascending order, but then also only supports these. And again, it's great for a range, but you also have another type that's called hash. What this does, it creates hashes, kind of like when your query is submitted to the query optimizer, it creates a hash and then it compares it against the hash in the area. But then with here, what you can do is it will use this hash. And this is great for identical checks, right? Where it equals something, right? So you really have to do when you're designing your indexes, and you should do this in SQL Server as well. What kind of queries are you going to run? Because that's in SQL Server, that's going to tell me more about where to place the indexes, less about the type, because you can only have one clustered and then I think it's 249 non-clusters, right? Here, it's going to determine the type of index you're going to have, right? But just like other indexes, these can get fragmented. You know, activity, deletes and inserts, they can all cause fragmentation. The default fill factor is 90%, 90, right? Remember, it's working with 8K pages, right? The difference there, when you're looking at the execution plan, you'll see SEQ scan, sequence scan, right? An index scan, you actually want the index scan, but sometimes you will get the sequence scan as well. The index only scan, you guys have heard the cover a query with an index. Well, that's exactly what an index only scan is it will look only at the index pages and it doesn't actually get down to the data pages, right? That can be very, very, a lot faster, can be very, very useful. And then here's some code that you can use to create the indexes, right? You can tell in products ID on products, then column name. So the code is very similar to SQL. You can have unique indexes. What's a little bit different is this concurrently keyword. What that means is that you can create the index while it's still online. So you won't cause any grief for end users, right? And especially more so now, the company I work for, 98% of the employees are remote, right? When you're in the office and you cause grief for an end user, they'll come to your desk, right? Can't do that if you're like most of my team is actually in Texas. That's a long ways away. I'm in McHenry. And so they're just a little less likely to reach out to you right away, right? If remote, but you know, if you're in the office, I had my people I've worked with in the past had no problem coming to my desk, none at all. And I'd say, not my fault. It's his fault. No. You know, and so, you know, when you go to create these indexes, you still need to be careful when you create them, because even if you're using the concurrently keyword, it's processing.
Yep.
Right. So
And my guess is at one point, I don't know the lock in Postgres, but much like SQL Server, when you do an online index rebuild, it doesn't block while it's building it, but at the end of it, it takes a schema modification lock.
yeah, I would need to go look and see.
And so something maybe like that may happen.
Yeah, maybe. Now where it is different, in SQL, you have rebuild reorg. Here you have reindex, right? And that's how you do your index maintenance through the course of the day. So we come back over here, come here.
Did you just say through the course of the day?
It's been a long.
No, good. I thought that might be a cool feature.
A long day.
Okay.
So, you know, I can gather information just like any SQL Server, you can do the same thing. You can get the fragmentation that's out there, types indexes, all that kind of stuff. So if I run this right here, you notice what I'm doing from PG underscore indexes to sysindexes, right? So if I run this, here's all my indexes. What I like about it, it actually gives me code. So it makes it a lot easier for me to see exactly what's happening. You can have include columns, just like in SQL Server, you have key columns, you have include columns, so it's really no different. What I don't know, because I haven't had a chance to really dig into it, is in SQL Server, you had key and include, and I was reading, I think, who was it? It was, I can't remember, Erin Stiletto. She wrote a blog post where she compared the two. And ultimately, she kind of came that it doesn't really matter as much
About what?
about whether you put the column in the key columns or the include column section. And so I can find that blog post and send it to you.
Not on searching, but it absolutely would in terms of fragmentation,
Yeah, it could,
depending on how.
right. What I don't know is that here, if that's the same thing here. I haven't a chance to really dig into that yet. But, you know, I like the fact that it's very similar. So again, this is about transitioning your SQL Server skills to Postgres. If you can bring the more skills you can bring over, the easier the transition is going to be, right? So, but then also sometimes I want to find out, because what that doesn't tell me is doesn't tell me what type of index it is. So in this right here, this will tell me the type of index that it is. So in this column right here, it's B tree. So currently in this database, there's no hash or any other types of indexes. They're all B trees. But that, I think if you're troubleshooting a performance issue, I think knowing the type of index is also important. No different than if you're troubleshooting performance, a clustered versus non-clustered index. It's kind of important to know where that is. But
So Postgres won't even use a B tree if it's an equality.
right. So, you know, and that's a big fundamental shift for us and from a SQL Server DBA to a PostgreSQL, because we're used to that B tree always being there, whether it's a clustered, non-clustered index, it doesn't matter. The B tree is on. Right. So, but sometimes you want to check the fragmentation, and so if I click here, so I don't have any fragmentation here, so it'll be in this last column here. So I can then build logic that if it's at X%, rebuild it, right? You don't have the reorg and rebuild option like you have in SQL Server. And then when you go to fix it, you do this. You simply reindex. Now, what you can do here is you can do a reindex for an entire schema. I'm not going to run that because it will take a long time to run it. One, it's a laptop, not a server. But you can reindex individual tables, or you can reindex individual schemas, or even at the database level, right? And then if you want to get different information about indexes, there's some queries that you can run as well. So like here's the index name. This is the name, index name. What schema is it in? So you can gather additional information. So index, I think, if I could really pick one topic over the years that I've been a DBA for 25 years now, index is the one thing that pops up probably the most. And the reason is because it impacts the users. I think if they're not managed properly, you will have a negative impact on your users, right? Security. You can use both Postgres accounts and Windows accounts. However, in order to use Windows accounts, you got to go modify not one, but two config files, right? And you got to put the information there. But in many ways, it's very similar to SQL Server. But again, you got to modify some config files. So at what level can you put it at? Well, the left is Postgres, the right is SQL Server. No instance versus cluster. We talked about that. So now look at this, database schema table row. Right? You can very, very similar. So your security skills will transition very easily over into the Postgres world. Now, to allow Windows authentication, there's a couple files. One is the pgident.config and pghba.config. You got to modify them both. The little screenshot in the upper left is the ident column or file. You got to put a map. See where it says map name? That name you'll need to go into the HBA column and modify it there. Those two need to match, right? And so I'm mapping the system user, could be me, to the Postgres username, right? So you're making a map there, right? Doesn't work very well on Windows 11. So it'll probably work much better within a domain environment. But it will work. There's a link there that really tells you more of the information of how to do it. But when you do make this change, it loads these configuration files when the service starts, right? So you can do two things. You can either restart the service, which brings the whole thing down, or you can run that command there, reload config, which will basically take all this and load it in the right places into some memory, so that now you can utilize the Windows authentication. Great push to use Windows groups, right? Rather than user accounts. Now, roles and groups. Now, some of the roles, there's a lot of roles, just like in SQL Server, there's a lot of roles that are here. This is all at the server level. In SQL Server, we're used to having users and databases. You got logins and users and data and SQL, right? These are all at the server level. These are globals. Remember I was talking about you can back up just the globals. These are some things that it will capture, right? And we'll talk, you can create your own as well. But database roles are global across the entire database cluster and not by individual database, right? And my opinion, this is just my opinion, I think it makes it a little more challenging to manage your user access, right? And where I think a lot, anybody work for a publicly traded company, right? If you work for a publicly traded company, you've got audits and lots of audits, right? One of the things I had to do is I had to show who had access to make changes to data on our financial databases, of which I think we had about 13 of them. And I had to run that usually at least twice a year, right? I think that process might be a little bit different and a little more challenging within the Postgres world, right? And so if you want to find out what logins you have, you simply run this query. There's a column, so you use role name, but there's a column called role can log in, where that is true, that is a user account, right?
Oh, yeah, because I was gonna say, I thought you had to do create user, but actually all users are roles,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
So you don't create users, you create roles.
Yeah, and so when I come into PG admin and I come up here and I go to logins and groups, I would expect to see create login, create group. Nope, create login and group. And there's a couple different things that one is you can give it a password, but also this right here can log in. That's the toggle that sends it from a group to a user account. Right, so you can flip that over, right? I see myself, man, I wanted to create a group, got to go back, right? Or I wanted to create a user account, got to go back.
I want to be honest, I didn't even know that you could create a group in SQL.
In Postgres?
No, like in SQL Server. I didn't know you could. I don't think you can. You can
create
take,
roles.
you can take an AD group and just
Right.
add it.
You can create roles.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Is that what you mean? Is that
Yeah,
what you mean?
Roles and groups are kind of interchangeable.
Oh,
Yeah.
Okay,
I was thinking active.
got it.
No.
So like DB read or
Right,
DB
Right,
execute
those are just.
is a
roles.
group,
Yeah,
but it's a role.
yeah, and I think over the years I evolved to calling them groups because I got tired of explaining to people what roles are.
So it's a login role or it's a
Yeah.
group role? I see.
Yeah.
That makes more sense.
Right.
Okay.
And then once you do it, you create, and then I go to membership and I can choose which role I want to put them in. So this is where you can grant your access, right? So come back over here. So, and then I can, again, this is very similar to SQL, is that what you do depends on what level you're at, right? So if you look at the database, it has all create temporary connect. So connect is same in SQL, right? So all is everything, right? Create, you can create objects. Temporary is just that. It's temporary. You can give it a date where you want it to be done with, right? That's cool. So schema, you only have 3. I'll create usage. Well, what's usage? Functions. You can use this function, right? And then there's the table level, and that's very similar. You have the maintain and trigger. That's a little bit different. Truncate and delete. That's a little different than SQL, right?
I believe you also got a great usage on the, schema. Serves.
It might, but that was a screenshot I got from when I tried to assign permissions. So it's possible. I would need to look into that. And so you simply do the check mark here, right? But you also, what you don't have is you don't have a deny. So in SQL, you have revoke, grant, deny, right? Here you just have revoke and grant. So revoke is your deny, right? So it's a little bit different.
Whereas like revoke is an action in SQL.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Here revoke is a,
it's equivalent to
command.
deny. Yeah.
or a,
So if I revoke you in SQL and you're in an AD group that's been granted,
right,
your user account is more neutral,
right.
right? Here, it's more of a deny, right? So come back over here. I can open this up. 7. So this was the query I was running on this. So these are my user accounts, right? So now I can go and figure those out because it says can log in,
Mhm.
right? Demo create a login, just kind of did that. Now, this is how I grant. So I granted access, the test account to this table. Now, if I want to deny them, I can go and I can revoke it. And now they're denied, right? So it's a little the same, but different, right? A lot of the same terminology, but kind of the implementation is a little bit different. Security is extremely important, right? You really need to spend a lot of time on this. I unfortunately have in my past, not that I care, but I made a few people not so happy with me when I tried to remove their access. And I've even told people, you do that again, I will remove your access. And you can explain because they crashed the system. And I said, you do that again, I will notify your manager that I am removing your access. And I will remove the access, then tell your manager. And that person now has to explain, because as a DBA, and this is what I've always told my students, is that, you read these lists of DBA responsibilities, right? It's backup, reindex, optimize, all these different things, right? I really think it comes down to 2 things. Make the database available, whether it be optimize indexes, make sure the system up is running, but also be able to recover in case of a failure. That's all makes it available, right?
Yeah, recovery is a big part of what a DBA does.
Yeah. The second set of responsibilities is protect the data. That includes who can read it, who can modify it, who takes a written document that has data on it, dumps it into the garbage can, these types of things. I think everything that we do falls into one of those 2 categories. I've been telling my students that for years. I've been telling my teams that for years. Everything we do has to fall into one of those 2 categories. And I even said, does it protect the data? No. Does it make the data available? No. Then why are we doing it?
The most, secure database is the one that nobody can connect to.
Right.
It's also the most useless.
True. Yeah. So that's a little bit about security. Now, remember we were talking about tuples? And we
Yeah.
were talking about dead tuples?
Yeah.
Well, this is how you can remove it. And it's this vacuum process. And you can tell how many tuples are there by querying this, the stat user table, right? So again, it should be run on a regular basis, but this is the part that really, this is the part I had the same concern about when somebody tells me they're going to use a cursor, right? It increases IO. How many people have caused a production issue?
Oh, of course.
Yeah, these guys are new. It's coming your way.
Yes.
Ask you this question, how many people have crashed the casino floor? Me, out in Elgin, I was there for 9 years. After I was there for 3 months, I crashed the entire casino floor. How did I do that? A cursor that we had an old sand, we already had the new one, we just hadn't replaced it yet. But it's still not my fault because I had to do the development, and here's where the fundamental problem was. I didn't have a development environment. So I had to develop against production, right? So when you do that.
That's where the risk is.
Yeah, well, and that's where the risk is too, right? So, whenever I see something that's gonna increase IO, and why did I crash the floor? I increased IO to the point where the system couldn't process fast enough, right? And if you've ever been to a casino, man, those slot machines are flying, right? And no, we don't track what you play. We track, well, we do. It's hard. It's not only do we track what machines you play at, we track in what kind of money did you put a $1 in or $5 quarter, what kind of money did you use when you played?
Mhm.
So we could actually run a report and say, you use mostly $1 bills. You use $5. We can actually get to that level. So the auto vacuum, by default, it's kind of similar like the auto update statistics. It's kind of a formula when it goes to auto update statistics. So in this case, the default is when 20% of the rows plus 50 rows are inserted, updated, or deleted, right? That will auto vacuum. And it'll go through and clean it. So in this vacuum title, that'll vacuum the title table. So if we come back over here and run 9, so I run this, this is in the accounting database, so I got to come up here, got to change accounting, hit save. I run this. And so vacuum count 3. Right, so if I come back over here, I update. Run this again. I have 1, right? So if I run this, I update it. I just updated, right? So logic would say if I ran it again, it shouldn't update anything, right? Yes. Run this. Two. So, because remember the multi-version?
Yep.
So now I got 2 dead tuples.
No, because it doesn't know what you're updating.
Exactly, exactly. It just saw an update. It doesn't really know.
Where's the records at some point, or what does it do? Like,
Deletes the old ones.
Deletes the
That's
old
the whole
ones.
vacuum process.
Yeah. So now when I run the vacuum against employees, run this. Now I run this. 0.
And as I understand it, this is not the same as a temporal table, i.e. you cannot
Nope.
time travel if these dead tuples still exist.
Right? You can't read them.
They're just, it's like garbage collection, right? It's garbage. It's not there for you to use. We just haven't gotten rid of them yet from our process that allows you to do
Right.
this.
how often?
Versus a temporal.
Every night?
I think it would depend on the system. Your data warehouse, I would, if I was loading this as my data warehouse, I would probably want to run this after I load because it's going to
Oh, yeah.
Tons of records.
Yeah.
If you had a system that's only, like we had a system that only a few people in the company used. It was an old legacy system and it was only used by just a few people and they didn't do a lot of activity. In that case, I probably wouldn't necessarily run it every day because it doesn't have a lot of activity. So I think it depends on your system, right? And so that is how you can clean those up. But remember, you always have this option of letting this, but it's kind of like the stats, auto update stats. It's great to have, but there's no guarantee. It could be 2 years before it actually.
And when you have a bigger table,
Yeah,
then, you know, why we changed the algorithm for auto stats.
right.
But here it looks like this is probably fixed and we're not gonna change it because you should be doing what you do.
Yep.
Keep the DBA jobs.
Yeah, yeah. So you can report bugs. So if I come, was it? Come here. So if this is the PostgreSQL.org. This is the people who manage and write everything. So if I come to support, down here, bug reporting. So if you find something that's not working right, you can see where it says bug reporting form. You can report it. They'll take it. I'm assuming that they have a process they go through. If just one person reports it as a bug, they may or may not get to it. If they got a lot of people, they'll probably fix it.
And if you got a problem at 2 o'clock in the morning, give them a call.
I think that's a great idea.
Said nobody ever.
Yeah. Yeah, so unfortunately, as DBAs, that's a danger we have, right? Getting woken up at 2 o'clock in the morning. When I was,
There's nobody at Postgres to call.
not really.
Yeah, that's where you end up getting a commercial version of it.
I tell you, I used to get tons of calls at 3 o'clock in the morning. Not for failures, because my team manages the UK.
Mm.
And so what time is 3 o'clock in the morning here? Well, 9 o'clock there.
6 hours ahead.
So when we had an opening, guess where we put the DBA? In the UK.
Yeah,
And it actually worked out pretty good because we had a budget in the UK dollar or pound or whatever is a lot different than here.
Yeah.
We got a good DBA over there for the equivalent of about $55,000 US dollars. And he's a great DBA. But he was ecstatic because it was a great salary over there. And so you can report bugs. And so
A lot of times they would get a company car. Because
Abu did get that.
UK.
He didn't get that.
You can get that?
So you can report bugs. Here's a bunch of useful links. This is a lot of stuff that I use to help put this together. There's a lot of really, really good information on YouTube as well. You know, I've always told my students, you know, that I've actually had people, my company won't send me to training. And I'm like, so why is that excuse for you not learning? Because there's tons of free stuff. We talked about SQL Saturdays. Some it's not free, but you know, there's these types of things. And guess what? YouTube. There's great information. There's a lot of crap, but there's also a lot of really, really good information on Postgres or SQL Server out on YouTube as well. You guys have the MVPs, like in the data community world, part of their requirement in order to get or maintain is they have to show contributions to the community. And how do a lot of them do it? Through blogs.
Mhm.
They do it through posting videos and
Yeah.
that kind of thing. There's a lot of really, really, really good information out there. Fortunately, there's a lot of good SQL stuff, but there's also a lot of good Postgres as well.
I'll also throw the shameless plug that since Microsoft does a lot of work with Postgres now, and hosts our Postgres Flex servers, there's good training on Microsoft Learn, right? We usually don't do our own training per se, unless we treat something like a first party
Mhm.
tool or software, and Postgres Flex server, which is essentially platform as a service with Postgres, to the point where somebody told me that when they do their restores, they do the exact same thing. They have a script that goes and takes thing offline, enters an entry in the or uncomments the file and then the config and then restarts it. It's just automated, but because it's Postgres, they have to do it in the same fashion.
Right. And so these are useful links. There's also a couple of good books out there. One of them is a new book. It's if you're in the SQL community, Grant Fritchie.
Yeah.
And his counterpart at Redgate put it out. It's actually a really good book.
It's an excellent book.
And there's two more that I use to help put this thing together. I will post those. I'll put these in here before I send it to you, Ross.
Sure. Yeah.
And so again, it might be early next week because tomorrow's Friday and my wife and I go camping every weekend. So.
Yeah, well, nice. I got that book. I bought that book.
So did I. As soon as it came out,
It's actually, they don't say it, but well, they do say it in the book. It's actually written for the SQL Server DBA that wants to learn Postgres.
yeah, that's kind of part of where I got this idea from.
Is that free?
So, but you know, I want to thank you. This is the first time I've ever, if you're on connect with me on LinkedIn, I put a post up there and said many, many years ago. And when I say many years ago, I am talking 1999. I taught a Paradox class.
Oh,
Anybody ever use Paradox?
didn't use it, but
Yeah.
I remember.
But since then, I have exclusively taught SQL Server, whether it be full-time classes or SQL Saturdays or user groups, exclusively SQL Server. This is the first non-SQL thing I have done for a long time, but it's
Wow.
the second. And one day I'll actually teach SQL Server here because the last session I did was PowerShell.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
So, but thank you for not falling asleep. I appreciate that. Although my wife is probably sleeping.
I'm almost falling asleep, but this was good enough to keep me awake because it's
Yes, same here.
almost past my bedtime.
That's my bit there. So thank you very much for attending.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dave.
Thanks.
This is good.
Thank you.
So we can stop the recording
Yes, we can.
just because I don't.
Oh, you're recording?
Drag it
Did
up.
I say anything bad?
Nah, we're,
No, you didn't say anything bad.
except for that shutting down the casino floor and how they track us.
Oh, everybody I caught knows that, sorry.
So with the log files,